And the man who was looking for his keys, he said, "Oh, I dropped it way over there, but the light over here is much better." So sometimes sometimes we don't want to do something because it's more difficult, even though it's the right thing to do. I mean, take basics for instance. I mean, it's not very, at least when basics opened up, it wasn't a very popular thing to eat healthy and to watch what you eat. And you know, because sometimes these things are a little pricier, but it was the right thing to do. Just like this event and the people that came here today, it was the right thing to do to come here. And it was the right thing to do for the people who organized it. So I want to thank everyone for being here, and I really hope that we can benefit from this event. Now, with that being said, the topic is Islam as American as apple pie. So when I thought about that topic, I thought about, okay, how can I relate? How can I help you relate to that topic so that you can understand that it's not just a mere play on words, but it's actually a reality. First of all, just a brief piece of history. Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, who brought the message of Islam, he went through persecution along with his followers for 13 years. And during that period, he sought a piece of land where he would be able to practice his religion freely. And God granted him that. And the people said, you know, come to our land. When you come here, you're not going to be here as a guest, but you're going to be here as a ruler. So he went to their land. And as soon as he went to their land, he started projects. And one of those projects that he started was a covenant to govern the society. Because it wasn't just Muslims that were going to be living there. There were going to be Muslims, there were going to be pagans, there were going to be Jews. And I just wrote down a few of the points that was in that covenant. Number one, the Jews shall have their religion, the Muslims their own. Freedom of religion. Each must help one another against any who fight those who adopt his document. They must give one another advice and consultation and do good and avoid evil. That's a form of democracy, right? Help must be given to those who are wronged. One's neighbor shall be treated as oneself without being harmed or sinned against. Treat someone as you would like to be treated. And no property shall be encroached upon without the permission of its owner. Now, if we look at the Constitution, we see that there are particular articles that are in that Constitution. And these articles, they're given to us as Americans because these are our natural rights. Something like we're doing today, our right to congregate, the freedom of religion, freedom of speech. Now, in Islam, the way that we adopt our laws, when the Prophet was passing away, before he passed away, he said, "I've left you with two things. I've left you with my words and my actions, and I've also left you with the law and the revelation that I received from God." Now, these two sources they don't contain every particular situation that us human beings are going to go through. So we have scholars who dig through all of this material, and they try to understand what the divine will be. So they aren't saying that they're speaking they're not saying that they're speaking on behalf of God, but they're speaking on behalf of their opinion. And that's why whenever they give an opinion, they always end it with Allahu A'lam. God knows best. But all of their ruling is based on a natural law. It's based on, what is the most rational and what is the truest course of action that we can take. Now, I want to talk about the Sharia for a little bit. And the Sharia is basically the sacred law of Islam. It's the way. And the Sharia was designed to preserve 5 things. So everything in the Sharia was set down to preserve one of these 5 things. The first one is religion. And that's why you see that we pray 5 times a day. And we go to our pilgrimage once in a lifetime. And we fast once every year. Those laws were given so that our religion will be preserved. The second one is the protection of life. And that's why it's prohibited to kill people unjustly. And this prohibition against killing is so important. Allah says in the Quran, do not kill a soul that God has made sacred. And every one of us is a sacred soul. And when we go to the pilgrimage, we actually go and we visit the house of God. Our soul is so sacred that it's more sacred than the house of God itself. That's what God has told us. And Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, said, whoever kills a soul without a just cause, then it is as if he had killed the entire humanity. Can you imagine someone who had killed every single person that lived on this earth? How corrupt that person would be. If you kill one person without a just cause, it's like you've done that. Number 3 is the preservation of intellect. And in Islam, alcohol is illegal. Like we're not supposed to drink alcohol. The reason of that is preservation of intellect, because Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, said that liquor is the mother of many evils, and it is the most shameful of all evils. Anyone who drinks liquor will neglect prayer and may commit incestuous offenses. Now, if we just look at the connection between alcohol and drugs and crime, you can see that the majority of people in the prison system, they did these crimes when they were under the influence. A major majority of the inmates. And how many people are being killed on the streets because of drunk driving or because they were hit by a drunk driver? So Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is saying, no, get away with all of it. So if we were to get rid of liquor, how many souls would we save? From the people who are committing the crimes to the people who are driving on the roads. And to the children that are being abused by mothers or fathers, alcoholics, aunts, uncles, and wives, our husbands even. And we have to remember that the American government tried to pass the temperance movement because they realized the evil of alcohol. The fourth is the preservation of property. Now I know there's a big hoopla about the golden ticket going around here, the Powerball. In Islam, gambling is actually unlawful because the preservation of property. Because you're taking a chance with your wealth. And people that go to casinos, they lose and lose and lose. They end up losing so much money, they can't go home, they can't go back to their families with nothing. So they end up, placing more on the table. But beyond that, usury, interest, is also unlawful. Stealing is unlawful, and theft is also unlawful. So this is the preservation of property. That's why these rules were set down. And then finally, the fifth one is the preservation of lineage. So in Islam, it's unlawful to have sexual relations outside of marriage. And the reason of that being is when you have sexual relations, there is a tendency to have a child out of that, a child out of wedlock. And a child out of wedlock, their honor has been tainted. Because, number one, they probably don't know their fathers. They probably don't know where their lineage comes from. So they have no connection to their family roots. And if we go beyond that, we're also prohibited to slander. It's unlawful to talk negatively against someone else behind their backs. And the ruling against that is so severe that the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that whoever were to speak negatively about someone else behind their back, it's like they're eating the back of their brother. Literally, eating the back of their brother. That's how nasty it is to talk about someone, because you're ruining their name. Even if it might be true, you're not supposed to talk badly against someone else because it's going to ruin their name. And this is the sacredness of the soul, like we mentioned earlier. Now, if we look at the word democracy, Islam accepts democracy. Islam is a very democratic religion. But we have to look at the word democracy a little further before we say that statement blindly. If we talk about democracy and meaning demos, the rule of the mob, which is what's happening right now. People who are being influenced by negative and false information, and they pass these laws with that negative information, then that's not the democracy that I'm talking about. The democracy that is congruent with Islamic tradition is a democracy in which citizenry, in which human beings do participate in the quality of life that they desire for themselves, their children, and for others. That is a democracy that is congruent with traditional Islam. And we've already gone through that. The Sharia was meant to preserve 5 things. And each of these 5 things are meant to preserve themselves and to preserve the society for the greater good. And it's not only in the hands of the government, but Islam is also compatible with monarchy. But we also have to look at the word monarchy as well before we say that statement blindly. Because a monarch is someone who ultimately has the ultimate say, but he's still working within the principles of law. For instance, we have a caliph by the name of Umar ibn Khattab. And it's a very simple example, but the power of it is immense. They had come back with all these gifts, and they gave these gifts to everyone in the city. And it was a piece of clothing, it was a piece of white clothing. So everyone had one piece of white clothing. But Umar ibn Khattab, who was the caliph, who was the leader of the city, he had 2 pieces of clothing on. So he stood up to give a talk, and he said, "Sama'an wa ta'an," listen and obey. And one of the people stand up, he said, "No, we're not going to listen, and we're not going to obey." And Umar said, "Why? Why aren't you going to listen to me, and why aren't you going to obey me?" He said, "Because you have 2 pieces of cloth, and we only have 1. So Umar told his son, he said, "Stand up and tell him what happened." His son stood up and he said, "My father is a very big man, he's a very tall man. So I gave up my piece of cloth for him." So the man sat down and he said, "Okay, I am going to listen and I'm going to obey." Just for 1 piece of cloth, he wasn't going to listen to Umar, because he felt that he was causing an injustice to everyone around him. But when he heard the reasoning behind it, then he accepted it. So this is Umar. When you have a monarch who behaves in the principles of law, then that's how Islam is congruent with monarchy. But when you have leaders who only follow their whims and desires, and they pass their laws because of their whims and desires, then that's where we cut ourselves off. And just to close it off with, I want to bring up Article 11 in the Treaty of Tripoli. And this is an article that was between the Ottoman government, the government in Turkey, and the American government. And it was proposed by George Washington. So the Article 11 in the Treaty of Tripoli states, "As the government of the United States of America, as the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion, as it has in itself no character of enmity against the laws, religion, or tranquility of Muslim, and as the said states never have entered into any war or act of hostility against any Mohammedan nation, it is declared by the parties that no pretext arising from religious opinions shall ever produce an interruption of the harmony existing between the two countries. Now, in the year 1899, the Americans were in the Philippines, and there was some conflict in the Philippines. So the American government, they were worried about the Muslim government declaring a holy war against the Americans because of their conflict in the Philippines. So they sent Oscar Strauss, who was the acting ambassador to Turkey. And they gave him a special diplomatic assignment. He was to translate that article into Turkish and take it to the Sultan. And this was to try and to prevent the Muslims against declaring jihad against the Americans, because the Americans were not in the Philippines to interrupt the religion of Muslims, and it was not a declaration of war against the Muslims of the Philippines. So when Oscar Strauss went to Turkey and he handed this article to the Sultan, when the Sultan read this, his face lit up. And he said, it would give me good pleasure to act in accordance with these suggestions for two reasons: for the sake of humanity and to help the United States of America. Now, this statement by the Sultan, Abdul Hamid, shows the goodwill of a Muslim ruler. Now, our challenge today that I want to set to you as an American is to be an American. And my challenge to myself and to my Muslim people is to be Muslims. And I think that if we both hold to these principles, then there wouldn't be any conflict. Thank you very much.
You can see clearly that the values that are shared there are American values. Some of them are literally parts of our legal system, our Constitution. And part of what I was going to talk about today is essentially the historical elements of how the fabric of Islam is a part of the American situation. And the original part of this, and I can say, like when I first started to learn about Islam, I was raised in America and had a kind of an American approach to history, which for me was to kind of ignore it, or to just get enough of a grade to pass. And but when I started to learn about some of the things in Islam that led me to history, I started to become really interested in history because I started to discover a history that I never knew about. And a big part of that is, to begin with, the fact that there were people from the very beginning that influenced America's reality. He mentioned the reference to Tripoli, but before that even, when America proclaimed its independence, Morocco was actually the first country to acknowledge America's independence. And so that's a very significant piece of history that was not, and probably will not be taught in mainstream America for some time. But I think those types of pieces of history help us to have a more broad understanding about the reality of the world that we live in today, in fact. So another piece of history, America's history, that is solely ingrained with the reality of Islam is that many of the slaves that were brought here to build the foundation of our schools, to build the foundation of our industries, those slaves, many of them were Muslims. And we have historical documents that show that. Some of them were literate slaves. And when they came, they became the accountants for some of the plantation owners. There are historical things that tell us that in the Library of Congress and otherwise. So even before that history, we talk about the theme of American history is that Christopher Columbus came and then all of Europe started to migrate to America, right? The captains of Christopher Columbus's ships were Moros. They were Muslims. They were Moros, another historical term actually, are Muslims who had to pretend to be Christian after the Inquisition happened. And that brings me to another piece of history of Islam in the West. It's not necessarily American history, but it's a history that we don't know about. Islam in the West is Al-Andalus. Spain was an empire, a Muslim empire, for 900 years. We never hear that history in America. We never hear that. So what we largely have when we talk about history is a Eurocentric history. And that Eurocentric history is the establishment of many of the institutions that we have today. And that is an important part of why we wanted to be able to share this discussion tonight. It's because it is necessary for us to open our minds up and to see history and to see the society that we live in a different light. The Muslims are simply a people who try to worship one God. We live in a time right now that Chuck pointed out. We Muslims in America and worldwide have been made the new bear in the woods. We're the new scary person, by the media's account. The reality that I've been trying to share with people, my own people, I'm from Southwest Wisconsin, is that Islam isn't like that. Islam is not like that. Many of the values that you get from Islam are American values. When I started to take on Islam, I was reading the Bible and the Quran, and the question that brought me further into Islam was, what's the difference? Where is the difference? Because there's so many similarities. And the answer, ultimately, to that is the oneness of God. But we have, in America, the freedom to choose and to practice your own faith. Now, one of the stereotypes about Islam is that it wants to wipe out every other thing in the world and just have Islam. That wasn't the way of Al-Andalus. That wasn't the way of that open society. That open society had in it Jews and Christians living side by side, studying together. While Europe was going through the Dark Ages and suffering from the plagues and all this kind of stuff, Andalus streets were lit up and gardens were watered. But we don't learn about that history. We don't know that. What we learn about is Muslims have to be feared, Muslims have to be feared. But if we can take away that fear, if we can remove that barrier, we can have the gardens flowing again. We can have the education that is necessary in a pluralistic society. We can live side by side and have different views. And that, to me, that's what I was raised to understand as an American. So what I've seen from the American people, and in our experience here in Janesville as well, in this short period of time that we've opened this masjid till now, I've seen the reality of the American people, that there are good-hearted people in this country. That there are people who are willing to open their minds and to take a moment and to look at a situation and try to figure it out for what it's really worth. And with that, that's where I see the change will come. That's where I see the hope for the future. Because as long as we're willing to open up to ourselves, each other, and to learn about what each other's differences are, and have the ability to go side by side in that and not fight with each other to the point of violence, then we have a chance to bring a new tomorrow. And this is the thing. I'm an American. I've been a Muslim for 21 years. My children were born and raised in America and no other place at all. They have the right to be the president of this country. So if that's going to happen, what kind of changes are we going to have to make in our society to allow for that? It wasn't long ago when, in 1920, women just got their first rights to vote in this country. In 1965, black people got the right to vote. We talk about the history of America, and we talk about the parts of the slave part of America. That is one of the most saddest pieces of America. We're not over it yet. We're still not over But how are we going to get from here to the next place? Because we have a pluralistic society that we need to protect. We need to make it America that is possible to have my children to be able to be a part of the future. And so we can't allow for ourselves to be afraid. The Quran says that he created man and nations and tribes so they might get to know one another. Those are the kinds of teachings that I've taught my children. That's what Islam is about to me. Truly, it is about worshiping one God, but in it, it has a connection to all these things that Ibrahim pointed out. We're not looking to be violent. In fact, next week we have a talk at this section this Friday. We have a talk at the masjid. And by the way, the address of the masjid changed as soon as we had our inspection. That's 200 South High Street now. But this is asking a question. This is a BBC documentary that says why we fight. And it talks about violence and military presence in the world. We are in the nation that has the largest military dominance in the whole world. We live in that nation. And our military apparatus is out in the world doing things that we as Americans don't know about. We don't even know. Some of the most frequent deployments in the last few years has been to South America. What are we doing in South America? I don't know of any conflicts in South America yet. But the question should be asked. We should know. And then when the media plasters all kinds of pictures of violence, and the story is told, there's the violent guy, get him. We have to be able to take a pause and say, come on, really? And especially now, you know who I am. You know where we're at. So if you have a question, we make ourselves available to be able to have this interaction and have this discussion. If there are questions, we want to be able to answer them. And that's one of the things I thank Chuck for reaching out and inviting us to be able to come here and to share this. So, you know, I go back to the expression, Islam is as American as apple pie. Apple pie is actually not even American. Come to find out. It's, apples are not indigenous to the American soil. They were brought here from Europe as well.
So it says he's a pie.
So I love talking about Islam, and I'll go on forever, but Chuck wanted to make sure that we get some interaction of questions. So please go ahead and ask any questions there.
Extremist Semitic flavor can be dangerous. And I'd just like your impression of the Islamic State, what's happening there, the interaction between them and the United States.
Sure. So to begin with, when I first heard the idea of an Islamic State, as a Muslim, my ear perked up, and I was like, could it be? You know, could it actually be a caliphate? That's what they were claiming at first, right? That they were a caliphate. And you know, that didn't scare me at all to begin with, to hear the idea. But I wanted to watch and see what would be their actions. And when I heard the first piece of news that said that they were doing anything, you know, violent to people indiscriminately, boom, I shut it off. It didn't have anything to do with Islam anymore at all. And I knew that in every single headline that came after that, I knew it as well. The thing about ISIS and Al-Qaeda before that is that I'm a Muslim for 21 years. And until 9/11 and Iraq, I never heard the word Al-Qaeda, ever. I had traveled through the Muslim world. It wasn't a part of an education. It wasn't a theme among the Muslims at all. So where did this come from, is my question. And like Chuck pointed out as well, I love you, man, is that it is a complete fabrication from the intelligence agency as far as I can tell. Because they needed to describe something that's happening over here. And it could be unintentional, but they created a vocabulary. They called this a name. And then the name became a reality and through the myth of media. Media built up further and further this story. And then we started to go along with it. Even Muslims would listen to the headlines and go, really, could it be? Oh my gosh, I hate those people. You know, it's become self-loathing Muslims, you know, stuff like that. And I was like, wait a second, none of this is real. Like, there is no Al-Qaeda. I was never taught that there was. And you know, I would look at all the various, because I'm learning about Islam as I'm taking it on. I had to study all of the various elements of what Islam, we inherited 1,400 years of Islam to our time. I needed to filter through all of that to understand what's culture and what are the actual differences between all these Muslim movements and things like that, so that I could circumnavigate myself through the insanity to the real thing. And so this whole thing of Al-Qaeda, I don't know where, it's nothing to do with Islam. But then, all of a sudden, you know, Bin Laden's killed, boom, we're not going to use Al-Qaeda anymore. What's our next flavor? ISIS. Ooh, that's even worse. And to tell you the truth, I'm not trying to you know, completely say that none of this stuff is happening at all, and just say it's a complete myth and I live in a world of unicorns or something like that. I'm not trying to paint that picture. But what I can say of a certainty is that these things are not an extension of Islam. Now, so to take those things aside, there are puritanical teachings. There are people who I've navigated myself away from throughout my career of being a Muslim, because their type of Islam is puritanical. And I've detected that, and academically those things are spoken about. The neo-Salafi, Wahhabi things. So you hear about those things in the media, but hardly anybody really knows what it's truly about, because it's all so layered. You know, there's so many layers to all this stuff. And truly, a person would have a difficult time completely understanding all this stuff. Because, like I said, it's been hundreds of years that some of this has been going on.
Did I hear you mention the word dawah?
Yeah.
Is that a part of your?
Our organization is called Janesville Muslim Dawah Circle, and dawah means invitation.
And I thought dawah meant, according to what I read, if I have it right, that it was more strict.
No, dawah means invitation. I don't know what would translate to strict, but
Okay.
yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure about the strictness, but dawah simply means invitation, and so for us, it's kind of an outreach and education that we've been doing for years.
If you could clarify for me, because I'm trying to learn too.
Yeah.
I've heard different things from different sources, but how does Islam view the Old and New Testaments and Jesus? I've heard that from some people that the Quran is really a third testament.
Yep.
They accept the Old and the New, and the Quran is the addition. And they view Christ as a prophet, but not as a Savior.
Exactly.
Is that relatively?
Yeah, we just gave a talk last week, actually. Ibrahim and Sabrina delivered a talk on Jesus in Islam. And so that is exactly it. One of the tenets of faith is that we accept all of the previous revelations that came from God. And so the Torah and the Injil are specifically mentioned, and there may be even more than that. So in fact, what is taught in the Quran is that there were prophets sent to every nation, 124,000 prophets throughout all of mankind's history. So yes, our view of Jesus is that he was born from Mary, a virgin birth, that he called to God. His message was the same message as all the prophets, is to worship one God. And that in the Quran, it speaks about the final supper. There's a chapter called Al-Madiyah, talking about the table. So the reference being the table that they ate at. And then it even mentions the ascension of Jesus. It even teaches about the second coming of Jesus. So, but we don't deify Jesus. Yep. So,
So a major prophet, but you don't view him as
right.
a divinity of the Son of
Right.
God.
And so in our belief of prophets is that they're not angels, they're human beings, but they're the most elevated of human beings in their time. So that they can be a pinnacle of exemplars to all the rest of humanity. absolutely.
What is the difference between the different sects, I guess you call them, between the Sunnis and the Shiites, and
yeah.
there's a couple more.
So, yeah, again, these are some of those layers of things that come in, and the Shia situation. So Ibrahim had mentioned one of the caliphs. So we have the history again of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He dies. There's a guy named Abu Bakr, and then Omar, who he made reference to, and then there's another man named Uthman. Okay, then after Uthman comes Ali, but with Uthman, he was assassinated. He was assassinated by somebody from among the Muslims, actually. And this conflict of trying to figure out who did that wasn't resolved very well, and that's where this split came, where the people who did that ended up becoming the Shia, essentially. So that is a age-old division that was a reality of the situation. Now, all throughout the years, though, no scholar had ever said that the Shia aren't Muslim. So this is where the complication comes in. It's like, well, they're Muslim, they're not Muslim. You want to do this yes-no thing, but it's just nuanced. So, so the Shia are a sect in the literal sense, because the word Shia means sect. And they broke off, and some of their views are that the lineage of leadership always has to be from the family of the prophet. So it's this inheritance of leadership, right? Well, the Sunni, or kind of mainstream understanding, is that Abu Bakr is a valid caliph, Umar is a valid caliph, Uthman is a valid caliph, and each of them were put in place by the Muslims of their time in each different ways. So, in fact, in that also comes an example of democracy, because for Omar, when he was dying, he set up a council of people, and he said, from this council of people, you guys pick who the next leader will be. So that was one form of democracy that was implemented at that time. And so essentially the Shia-Sunni thing. So Sunni means like that you follow the Sunnah of the Prophet. So technically, even the Shia would be Sunni, because all the Muslims follow the way of the Prophet, you know. And some of the other things that distinguish the Shia, though, again, like I said, I took on Islam, so I had to look at some of these things to figure out, you know, who am I going to group myself with? Where am I going to go to get my information and feel like it's good, sound? And the Shia do this thing because of the grandchildren of the Prophet, peace be upon him, having been killed. They do this thing of self-flagellation. They beat themselves in mourning the death of those grandchildren. I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to teach my children to do that. So I'm not going to become a Shia. You know, and there are some parts of the Shia thing that are very close to the Sunni element. And then there are extreme parts of the Shia thing that go so far as to even say that the prophethood should not have been with Muhammad, but it should have been with Ali. That's the most extreme point of view among some of them. So the other part of the Shia thing that is, again, historical is that the word assassin comes from a Shia group that used to do this. And the word assassin actually comes from hashish, hashishans. Because they would take hashish and then they would go kill people. And so, again, I'm going to do whatever I can to kind of stay clear of that type of a group. And especially if they try to, you know, reinvent that wheel in this age. I'm not going there. So it is necessary to understand some of these various things. But again, how does it really affect? Because the reality of Shia-Sunni thing is that there was no conflict. Like when I was becoming a Muslim and I was learning my faith, I had a friend from Iraq. I said, "You come from Iraq? It's like 50-50 Shia-Sunni. Like, how does that work?" He said, "Not even an issue. We're all family. Like, we intermarry with each other. There's no conflict." There wasn't a conflict until outside forces come in and go, "Shouldn't there be a conflict though? Yeah, go fight them." You know, this is a historical technique of colonization. You know, and one very easy part of that is to create even basketball teams or football teams or soccer teams. Put a different flag on the different poles and then say, I don't like that flag. No, I don't like that flag, and put them at odds with each other, right? Well, and this is part of what this talk is going to, this Friday, is that there's somebody who profits off of all that conflict. There's an industry that profits off of all that conflict. It's an industry, literally. War is sells. You know, there's a famous song, "Peace sells, but who's buying?" Right?
Good song.
But on
Great
the other hand, but on the other hand, war sells like crazy, and the media is its propagation tool.
And the bankers and the war industry.
Exactly. Especially the bankers, because they profit off of both sides. Whoever is making content.
I'm real happy to see both of you here tonight, trying to build more understanding in the community. And I think this is great. When I read about it, I wanted to be here. I know there's several groups trying to build support with the mosque. First Congregational Church, there's several members here tonight. You were over for the church service on December 21st, August night service, and participated with Reverend Tanya on that service. We're also thinking of getting a discussion group after church sometime with you, Reverend Abraham. And for those of you who don't know, that Soleil is a EMT coordinator in Deerfield, and
The chief of an EMS service.
up there, so his time is tied up quite a bit up there. Well, we're building support through our church, First Congregational Church, and there'll be several of us there Friday night. And I encourage all of you to go to the mosque on Friday night, and especially to see this video. And one of the things we learned is you take your shoes off at the door, and you watch the prayer at 6 o'clock, right at 6 o'clock. And that was very educational for all of us. So again, it's a building community together of understanding, mutual respect, and thank you for what you're doing.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the points that, again, I would go back to influence, or to emphasize, is truly what Islam is about is that worship. It's about us doing our prayers and things like that. It's the peripheral issues that come into the media. Islam's not really about those things. It's about being able to find that space in the day where you can do your worship of your Lord. And truly, that's what the focus is about. That's what you learn. And then beyond that, there are these benefits of knowing moral and ethical, you know, ways of affecting societies. And so there, this is, you know, Muslims have something to say about every aspect of life, because Islam is a way of living. It's not just 5 daily prayers and things like that. It is also how to do trade, how to one of the issues that I call upon Christians especially for is that Jesus, before he passed away, or before he left this world for the ascension into the heaven, the last thing that he did as a rebellious act in this world was that he went into the temples and he threw over the changing table. Those changing tables, that reference is to usury. They were practicing usury, changing money. That influences our world so much today. We talk about the banking industry making money off of the war industry. That's exactly how they do it, because they make interest off of every single transaction worldwide. And that thing, Jesus, even before he ascended into heaven, said to that, he said, get rid of your cloak for a dagger against that. So this one issue, for people, if you're even atheist, it doesn't matter. It's something to stand against because it affects everybody in every society. And these are the kinds of common grounds that I hope to find with anybody who's interested to. And it's not about trying to convert people to Islam or have Islam take over the world and things like that. Islam has something good to offer society. And I say it with every bit of confidence that I feel like Islam is actually a stronghold for the values that we hold as Americans. It's the stronghold for that, because we still say that interest is absolutely forbidden. God doesn't like it. We go that far. It's a religious thing to us. Right? Well, our society is so influenced by this, we would say to ourselves, how could you live without it? How could you live without it? It can be done. We've done it before. In America, we used to rely on our family before we had banks to be between us. You know, if you wanted to build a house, I love the Amish, because what the Amish do when somebody gets married is they build a house for them. The house is the biggest part of everybody's budget, taking care of your mortgage. If you get that taken care of, all you have to do is look for food. So, but for us, for this society, anything you want to do, you want to go to school, take a loan. You want to buy a car, take a loan. You want a boat, take a loan. If you want a house, for surely you got to take a loan. Right? And then we are born into debt and we die in debt. And that's not American. To be honest with you, it's not. So how do we work together to try to, stand against these kinds of trends? And this is the big thing, when we talk about the war industry, by God. In Islam, there are verses of the Quran that talk about fighting. It's a part of the human condition. But am I going to try to take a gun against an industry like that? How ignorant would I be? I mean, my life is over. Look at the types of weaponry that are made today. They can vaporize me for crying out loud. I mean, like, I'm not going to try to stand against that in any, conflictual way. If I do, I'm wiped out. So all I can do is to reach out to fellow human beings and say, this isn't right, is it? Like, we believe that together, don't we? I'm not insane here, I know that. So we need something to help us to get through that. We need principles to be able to help us to get these points out. And to be able to, I'm going to write a letter, I'm letting you know. I'm going to write a letter to Obama. And I'm going to try to mention some of these things to him. And it may never reach him, but it's going to be an open letter, and hopefully I can share it with everybody. But it's going to call upon him, if he can, to try to affect this place in a way that would bring us to these freedoms, these real freedoms. We should be free from the banking industry, free from the war industry.
Question. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, which everyone thinks of the Quakers. And something people probably don't know about historically is the Quakers were so anti-violence that they literally were prohibited from joining the revolution. And so they split over that. People don't realize the Quaker Church actually split at the time of the revolution and created two different groups. One group, of course, supported the revolution, and these days we think about Quakers, my lefty friends all think they're all peaceniks, right? But in fact, I grew up next to a right-wing Quaker, and Richard Nixon was a Quaker. So obviously, that side of that's what happens to religions. I'm just curious about Muslims in this country. Is there a grouping that's more sympathetic to the peace movement, and is more engagement with that?
That's the predominant larger population. This is one of the things I find also very interesting in the modern kind of media hype, if you will, is that the propagandists are trying to develop a situation of denying Muslims the reality of the definition of Islam, which is peaceful self-submission to the will of God. It is about peace. Salam means peace. But the propaganda machine is trying to say, Islam's not about peace. Look at all this violence going on. It's about that. How could it be about peace when all that we see is this and this and this? Well, it's because all you're showing me is this and this and this. They're not showing me talking tonight, right? They're not showing the people who are actually practicing their faith and peaceful. The doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, who are a big part of our society every single day. They're not showing those people. They're showing the scary people I'm afraid of.
Like you were mentioning about the propaganda, like from what little I've read of the Quran, ISIS is not part of what Islam stands for. And I know that there are Muslims all over the Muslim world who are decrying what ISIS does. But why is it that the mainstream media, why do they not try to educate more about what true Islam is? And why do they perpetuate the myth that all Muslim people are bad? Because
That's the big question.
what is in it for them if they do that?
Well, that's why I say it's a propaganda machine for the war industry, really. Because as long as there's conflict, everybody right now wants to go out and buy their own gun because they might have a neighbor who's a Muslim. Well, the reality of being in America is that a Muslim might be buying a gun too.